everyone, Mr. Powell here for Noble World. Welcome back to the History Through Art series of mini lessons on YouTube Kids. History Through Art is a great way to learn about important people and events in history because artists can show us what people did and why it's important all at the same time. That is the power of art. And today we're going to use great art to help us learn more about one of the most important people in history, Napoleon. The painting is called Bonaparte Before the Sphinx by Jean-Léon Gérôme. If you haven't already viewed our lesson on Jacques-Louis David's painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps, I suggest you start there. David shows us one of the greatest military commanders in history, leading his army over the highest mountains in Europe, Alps, to invade Italy. Like all great works of art that show us historical events, it doesn't just show us what happened. It also shows us why it matters. It matters because Napoleon was doing something that only two great commanders had done before in history. And he was about to become the next Charlemagne, which means only the second of all of Europe's leaders to temporarily rule all of Europe. Only 2 years earlier, Napoleon had tried to do something even greater. He tried to become the second Alexander the Great in history. Alexander the Great had been a Greek commander who became the Pharaoh of Egypt and built the largest empire in history of the world up to that point. It stretched from Europe to India. Napoleon knew his history and wanted to do the same. So he took an army to Egypt and conquered it too. But then he came face to face with what I like to call the real riddle of the Sphinx. The traditional riddle of the Sphinx goes like this. Which creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? The answer is a person. Human beings crawl on all 4s as infants, walk on 2 legs in the afternoon of life, and then, when old and weak, walk with the help of a 3rd leg, a cane. It's a cute riddle, of course, but when you look at the Sphinx in Egypt, another much greater mystery presents itself, which Napoleon, who was still known by his family name Bonaparte, had to consider because he wanted to become a great conqueror. The mystery, indeed it's much more than a riddle, is this. What happened to the Egyptians who built the pyramids? The ancient Egyptians were able to build colossal monuments and massive sculptures. Egyptian civilization, as we now know, lasted over 3,000 years. That's hard to imagine. The United States itself is almost 250 years old, which might seem like a lot, but Egypt lasted more than 10 times as long. And for thousands of years, the pyramids were the tallest structures on Earth. But by the time Napoleon arrived in Egypt to try to copy Alexander the Great by conquering it, and then building an empire all the way to India, the civilization of ancient Egypt had completely disappeared. All that remained was ruins. Indeed, when Napoleon arrived in Egypt, the meaning of the Egyptian writing system, known as hieroglyphics, had been completely forgotten. All Napoleon could do was stare at the Sphinx and ask himself, what does it really mean to be great? Which makes a pretty good title for the painting, or perhaps simply, what is greatness? Even if the Egyptians had been the greatest of the ancient people of their time, they had basically disappeared. No one in Napoleon's time knew their story. Would that happen to Napoleon too, no matter how big of an empire he created? In the painting, Napoleon's army is marching across the great desert, and it looks almost comically small. Napoleon himself looks tiny compared to the Sphinx. He must have wondered if anything he could do would matter through the ages, or, like the great Sphinx, would his greatness disappear? Napoleon's expedition to conquer India would end in failure. He would later conquer Europe, but then was quickly defeated. Strangely, one of the most important things Napoleon did was to bring scientists and historians with him to study Egypt. When they discovered the Rosetta Stone, it allowed them to learn how to read hieroglyphics, and thus learn more about ancient Egypt than had ever been possible before. I don't think Napoleon ever solved the real riddle of the Sphinx. But even if he didn't ever learn what greatness really is, he did leave his mark on history. After all, we're studying him to this day. Thanks to artist Jean-Léon Gérôme, we get to enjoy thinking about him and what really matters in history.